In the early days, we had to beg for volunteers. Now we're turning volunteers away. The kitchen was like a galley kitchen. It was only a few feet wide and maybe 6 or 7 feet long. And today we're on a 4.5 acre campus in East Bay, Provo. I mean, I still have people that come up to me today and go, well, they should just go get a job. And it's not that simple either, because of the mental health state he was in. And so they released him, and within minutes of him being released, he walked out in front of a car. I was a little embarrassed initially, and so I turned away and I thought, man, I just devalued her as a human being because I was worried about what other people would think.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Philanthropic Podcast. We are extremely excited to have our guest today, Brent Crane, Executive Director of Food and Care Coalition in Provo. We're going to dive into homelessness. Brent's been working in the industry for 36 years, and so we're extremely excited to hear from you, Brent, hear from your experience, hear some stories, and just help listeners empathize more with those experiencing homelessness. And I know you've learned a lot, and I'm excited to dive in and hear your story and how you got into this and just the lessons learned over the last 36 years. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, absolutely. So I always like to kind of start at the beginning, right? Everybody kind of has those key experiences in life that take them to what they end up doing in life, whether those are poor choices they make or giving back or the career that they take. But what got you into working as the director at Food and Care?
Yeah, I was a business major, and having served a faith-based mission back in Philadelphia and coming home and being exposed to a lot of different cultures, socioeconomic status. Philadelphia is kind of the melting pot, of the country, and so when I came home, I really wanted to. I was a little naive, I think, a little idealistic. But I was like, I want to do something that for a career where I feel good about coming home every day, and it's not just about making a dollar, right?
Absolutely.
Now, again, that was naive because as a nonprofit charity, we rely on people, that do well in business and have success and have discretionary income that they can donate. But so I kind of surfed around, did sociology classes, psychology classes, family, home, and social sciences. That's where I ended up. And then I went back, and that was at BYU. Got my graduate degree there, or my undergraduate there, and then did my graduate degree up at the University of Utah in nonprofit management.
Yeah, amazing.
So, yeah, and there were some opportunities. The Food and Care Coalition was not really relevant, wasn't around until the late 1980s.
Okay.
We went through what we call the Deinstitutionalization movement, where federal government essentially defunded mental health institutions. And as a result of that, Provo housed the only, state hospital. And so when that public policy kind of hit the pavement, the reality was individuals were being released from the state hospital, and many of them didn't have family or were just not ready to reintegrate into the community. And so it was our faith-based community that kind of received those initial requests for housing, for food, for where do I shower, where do I get clothing, where do I address my mental health issues, addiction issues, or whatever, was the gateway to their homelessness. So Food and Care Coalition, the name Coalition has always been out of honor and respect for those faith-based communities that stepped up and said, hey, we can't do it all, individually, but collectively we can put our efforts together and try to address this social issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So then out of that, Food and Care was born then, right? And this was in what year? What was the?
This was in, it operated under Utahns Against Hunger. They kind of loaned us their 501c3 while we kind of put together IRS documentation and mission and got a board put together. So there was a couple of years where it kind of just operated out of the different churches from about 86 to 88. But in the fall of 88, it was formally formed. And then I got involved in the spring of 89 and then became the director in 93. So total, I've been there for about 36 years now.
Wow, amazing. And how have you seen it change over those 36 years?
Yeah, it's like the rough stone rolling down the hill, right? It's, in the early days, we had to beg for volunteers. Now we're turning volunteers away.
Yeah.
You know, in the early days, we had a 1,500 square foot roach infested, terrible, you know, facility. It was just an old home that had bowed floors and like I said, roaches everywhere. And, you know, we could seat, I think, 22 people. You know, the
Wow.
kitchen was like a galley kitchen. It was only a few feet wide and maybe 6 or 7 feet long. And today we're on a 4.5 acre campus in East Bay, Provo.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's congratulations on the growth in terms of just the amount of help and care you're able
Well,
to
we wish
now
that we
give,
didn't
right?
have to grow,
Okay.
but the reality is, you know, the economics of
Yeah.
the issue is there's always going to be, and we know that there's always going to be poor among you. And so, you know, we're just glad that we're a local community response to the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's a negative thing to say, right? You don't necessarily ever want to grow, you know, the
Yeah.
amount of unsheltered out there, but amazing work that you guys are doing. And like I mentioned before, I've worked with food and care in the past. I've volunteered. I've helped serve food. I've, you know, taken part in those activities, which were awesome, right? Some of the early activities that kind of helped me start seeing homeless individuals for who they are, and as individuals that need help and shelter and resources, right, to really get back to live their dream life.
And that's probably the key mechanism of what the Food and Care Coalition is. The Food and Care Coalition isn't significant other than we're connecting the community, business community, faith-based community, our educational community, our business, you know, and we're connecting them to individuals that, you know, are kind of on the outside looking in. And that's usually where the miracle comes, is through that point of connection with one another. You know, if we serve at arm's length, we really never, you know, I've always said that service is something that we do when it's convenient, and charity is something that is rarely convenient. And when you're working with the homeless population, you love them because they're, you know, the resiliency of the human spirit is amazing, and I've seen it every day in the fact that they're living in awful circumstances, yet they come in and oftentimes have a smile on their face and they have a cheerful disposition, excuse me, and they're wanting to find a way out, right?
Yeah.
But yet they get up every morning and it's a new day, and so that's something that's always been amazing to me.
Absolutely. To kind of talk more about that connection between community and business and local leaders and, you know, the homeless individuals that you work with, how have you seen people's lives changed and their kind of their, I guess, attitude towards helping and being charitable and choosing charity, right?
Yeah.
How have you seen that develop?
Well, I think coming from a faith-based perspective, and I apologize, I'm not going to make this about religion, but you know, I look at, and we can look at a lot of faith-based leaders, but you look at Christ as a faith-based leader. I think it was his ability to connect with people that brought about change in their lives. Yeah, it was a message that was there. There was opportunity, education, growth, personal growth, change, personal change that needed to happen. But I really believe it was in that connection. And so that's why I say, you know, the Food and Care Coalition we've brought in, you know, on that 4.5 acre campus now, you know, we own the property, we own the facilities, but we've brought on other partners, Wasatch Behavioral Health, Mountainland Community Health Center, My Story Matters, 3 permanent on-site partners, and then we've got about 30 visiting partners from the VA to BYU Nursing to UVU School of Hygiene, you know, students and beyond. And it's about that connection, because sometimes, for example, I'll just give you a quick story. We had a client that we had been wanting to get him into some addiction recovery, and the message just, it wasn't resonating. And he came into our dental clinic, and this is back in the day when Sheriff Smile was on site, Dr. Vogel, who's since passed away. But when he was on site, we had volunteer dentists that would come in and do dentistry. And obviously we had a population that had a need there. And this client, it was from a conversation he had with a dental assistant where she said, I would love to work on your mouth. I'd love to help you restore your mouth, but we've got to address the addiction first. And it was that conversation that was done out of from a point of education, but also from a place of warmth and love and concern and not judgment. That conversation, they developed a really good relationship, and that individual sought out recovery because of it.
That's amazing.
So it wasn't anything we did as a staff.
Yeah.
We had made several attempts at that.
Yeah.
But so you just never know where that connection point's going to come. And that's really what I think the significance of our agency is there's just a lot of touching points and connecting points within all the services and volunteerism and help and support that is happening and activities are going on, that's where the miracle comes from.
I love it. I love it. And that's the whole point of our podcast. That's the whole point of, our channel and our initiative is to create empathy through media to inspire action against poverty. However that may be, poverty, there's a lot of shapes and forms of poverty, right? And I love what you've talked about in enabling the community to come in and essentially experience empathy, right, towards these individuals and walk, a few inches in their shoes per se, right,
Yeah.
and kind of have that experience.
Well, we have a parallel situation that's happening right now politically, right? With the assassination of Charlie Kirk here in Utah, I think a lot of people, have had a tough time swallowing that pill that Utah, of all places, that would be something that would happen. But that, when we get the left or the right or the Democrat and the Republican or, whatever issue we want to use as a point of contention, when we turn off the dialogue, that's when we lose.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with homelessness and really any social issue. We've got to come to the table and we have to want to learn. We want to know why. I mean, I still have people that come up to me today and go, well, they should just go get a job. And it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And when you can walk in their footsteps and see what they're, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you don't know where your next meal's coming from, when you don't know where you can bed down without being harassed or being somebody's property or someone pushing you off and away or looking at you or giving you stares of disdain, that wears on a soul.
Yeah.
And so we've got to bring it back within the realm of comfort and opportunity, and that's why I said that's really what the Food and Care Coalition's about, is creating those opportunities for service within the community. Because we don't want to, Elizabeth Smart, her situation. Many people, maybe some of the younger generation doesn't know, but she was kidnapped by a homeless gentleman that was brought home by a well-intentioned community member that wanted to provide some work, and that individual ended up taking advantage of their family. And so the fact that the Food and Care Coalition is there, it's kind of provides that buffer experience where you as a community member can come in. You don't necessarily need to take a homeless person home into your home, but we can provide, a full gamut of services from, getting a shower and getting some clothing and hygiene items and getting a solid 3 square meals a day and having access to mental health and dental and mental health, the educational services, housing services. Unfortunately, that's our biggest gap is the housing.
Yeah.
We wish we could do more, but.
Yeah. I want to kind of address a couple things that we've seen, as we've started to tell more stories and interview people and get their life story and so people can understand more, why are they on the streets? What are underlying issues? Where are the gaps in treatment? What's kind of happening, as we try and get that real raw storytelling. And, some people have the mental clarity to articulate exactly what that is. And some people maybe are putting the wrong labels on things, right? As you talk to people. And what I've really found as I've kind of been on my journey of, I don't come from a whole line of, education that was completely focused on, ending homelessness, right? That's not necessarily where all my focus was, but I kind of came into it I think well-intentioned to just want to make a difference and make an impact, and kind of as a journalist in some ways, right? A creative journalist that could kind of tell these stories and try and do some good and mobilize the community to do so as well. In some of the stories that we've shared, I've seen immediate feedback of, oh, like, no, we don't need to donate, or that person, like you mentioned, that person should go get a job. That person, is the healthy adult male, right, with his family. Why is he not working, right? And there are so many underlying issues, right? The fact that, well, if he goes and works, it's a 2-week period till you get a paycheck, right?
Yeah.
And maybe he has no way to have housing for those 2 weeks, and he has young kids, right? So what's
somebody
gonna
like,
happen there?
somebody, for example, somebody that has schizophrenia,
Yeah.
you could probably have a 10, 15-minute conversation with that individual and think they're completely normal.
Yep.
In terms of not having, mental health as an issue that would maybe be debilitating. But the more you engage and the more you understand, and then you see the dissociative thought come into play, and then how that impacts their ability for just simple tasks during a day. And so when I said, use that example or analogy of just go get a job, there's some people I would be doing the client as well as the employer a disservice to get them a job where they're at now.
Right.
That doesn't mean they can't work towards that.
Yep.
But that takes time. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that when we were looking at building our facility, we had the choice of being, do we want to build an emergency shelter? Well, zoning really didn't permit that. So that was kind of off the table. But we looked at it and said, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to just be a Band-Aid or revolving door, much like our prison system? A lot of the people, most of the people, 90%, I don't know what the recidivism rate is, but it's extremely high, right? And so same with homelessness. Individuals that come into the homeless system oftentimes come in, exit out, and then come back in, exit back out, come back in, exit back out. Now, part of that is because of the economics. There's that line in the sand of, I've got enough money to be housed today, but tomorrow I don't. Or this month I do, next month I don't. And when you're living in poverty and you're living right on that line, most of us are far enough away from that line that there's a buffer.
Yep.
We've got friends, we've got family, we've got maybe a 2-person income in our household or other factors, right? For those that are experiencing homelessness, they often don't have that. They're at the end of the rope. And so obviously mental health and the challenges now is back in the, when the deinstitutionalization movement, back in those days, it was lock people up because that was what was safe and best for society. It really didn't take into consideration, the individual circumstances. And of course, at the time, a lot of the medication was very experimental. We've come a long ways in that. That's not my personal field, but I know that field has come a long ways in how we can treat schizophrenia, how we can treat psychosis or bipolar or things of those natures to help clients better manage life and avoid poverty and homelessness all to begin with. But addiction is another pathway. Economics, maybe a family grew up in poverty their whole life, generational poverty, so they're just mimicking what mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and great grandma and great grandma came from. Or sometimes it's just a matter of education. Did I take advantage of education when I was younger? Did I not? Was it presented to me or emphasized to me as a child, or was it not? And so a lot of these issues, and I think we can all agree that homelessness is rarely that, middle income, average person or household that overnight becomes homeless. That still is rare. And usually in those circumstances, they're going to exit homelessness as quickly as they entered it because they've got a lot of wraparound tools, and they don't maybe have some of the barriers that some of our people that are dealing with mental health or addiction do. So, and I've been amazed. I'll tell a quick story on one of a gentleman. His name was Eric. He had come up here to go to BYU. He'd always had a dream of coming to BYU, and he was from California. Schizophrenic, African American. So this was 20 years ago. So our population still at the time was maybe 1% African American. Sweet kid, but I knew and anybody else knew that he was probably not going to get into BYU with his background in education. Not that he couldn't have been successful, but it just, I mean, I was amazed I got into BYU. So it has nothing to do with race or anything like that. It's just, I think his background and upbringing and education kind of led to that. But he started to become destabilized. The medication he was on, it was clear a lot of times in this industry, you sometimes have to bump or adjust medications or change medications. But you also need a family member that can kind of monitor and see how that's impacting them, having a third party, right? He didn't have that. And he started to become very agitated, very aggressive, which we knew this is not his normal state. And we loved him. Our whole staff just loved the kid. And we wanted what was best for him. But his medication was needing adjustment. And we actually went to the mental health authority and said, hey, he needs some help. And they said, well, unfortunately, Medicaid, Medicare doesn't pay for that. And so we really can't assist him. And it just got to the point to where he became so disruptive that we actually had to call law enforcement and they had to come and pick him up and put him in a temporary lockup facility in downtown Provo. And they couldn't handle it either because of the mental health state he was in. And so they released him, and within minutes of him being released, he walked out in front of a car, was in ICU for 3 months, had a limb amputated. And I remember me and his caseworker still continued to visit him, and we were trying to help him relearn how to, get dressed with only one arm now, and we were able to reconnect him with his family, and a mental health authority worker came in, and I feel bad to this day, but that individual came in and said, hey, your Medicaid came here, or Medicaid or Medicare came through, we can help you now. And I said a few swear words and said, get out. And but what happened is that led to me having a discussion with the leadership at the mental health authority. And they admitted, there's things beyond our control. That's how we're funded. We could not reach out to them, but they said, you know what, we can do better. And so the two agencies worked together over a period of years to where now the mental health authority is inside our building. So their jail outreach program and their homeless outreach program are stationed in our building. And I believe you're going to be interviewing somebody from their team later. But anyways, it's just, we saw a problem, and we could have hid behind administrative policy, red tape, but we said, no, we can do better. Yeah. And the agencies came together and found a better path forward to where we don't have that situation happen again.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. And it's good to see that reform and seeing, the good that you continue to do and the way you're able to overcome that. And those are detrimental, sad mistakes, right, that happen. And as long as we can move forward and we can rebuild and we can make it better, right? Then that's what learning and growing and working towards this is, to ensure that people have the care and help they need, right? And a lot of that comes from the community and those crucial components and partners and others that can make that happen. I'd love to jump into, I know you just told one story, but I'd love to jump into more of the people and individuals you've seen and worked with over the last 36 years. What have you seen in terms of, I guess you can't, like we said, it's not just one type of individual. It's not just one case, right, and one story, but what are some of the kind of most common cases of homelessness that you see kind of on a daily basis, over the last...
Yeah, the gateways are different. I mentioned a few of them, obviously generational poverty coming from that dynamic. Mental health is obviously going to be a big one. Probably 50% of our clientele experience some kind of mental health crisis. Addiction. Now, addiction probably people assume, and I was probably in the same camp myself. I would think that would be like half our clients, right? Now, it's less than 20%. It's usually right around 17, 18% of our clients that have addiction issues. And a lot of times it's to cope with the mental health.
Yeah.
They seek that out in order to deal with that. And then you've got aging out of the foster care system. Is one that we don't always think of, but that's very common. The kids that come from that oftentimes are very institutionalized.
Yeah.
And so they're used to somebody else caring for them and taking care of them. And if you're not adopted by age 2 or 3, usually, I've got family that have had to adopt, and you usually want the newborn baby and everything. And so the older they get, the more likely it is that they're going to age out of the foster care system. Yeah. So that's another gateway. Obviously, economics. We had a gentleman that came in that went through a divorce, and the economics of the divorce, he was out on the street. He was paying alimony, child support, and he just didn't have enough money to cover, the cost for himself. Yeah. And so he lived in our facility for a number of years, and he actually became one of our support staff. Oh. and helped do that. We've had one of our clients that used to, he was up here with the National Guard, and he had received services from us, and he came back in and did haircuts for us for a number of years because we have a barber shop right there on site. And he says, "Hey, I do that for a living, and I would like to give back." So there's those common, stories. But as I said, those are, if anybody, the listeners have ever watched the movie The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, great story. Here's an individual that went from homelessness to a millionaire. He became a stock trader, right? But he didn't have addiction issues that he had to overcome. He didn't have mental health issues to overcome. He was well educated. He had a strong work ethic. It was just time. Yeah. He just needed time to overcome his barriers, and he was going to exit poverty and be successful. But for those that do have those other barriers, it's really debilitating. And one of those, I'll just give as an example. Her name was Christine. She's since passed. And it was in the early days of my career. I was working with her. She was bipolar, and I think there were some other mental health challenges. I don't recall everything. But in the office, we had a very gregarious, connecting relationship. And one day I came in, and this is in the early days, I'd have to come in and cook breakfast because we didn't have any support staff that came in that early. So I'd go in, do breakfast, and then go to the administrative portion of the duties and grant writing or whatever. And but I came in this one morning, and the milk and the cereal, there was nothing there. And so I had to run over to Smith's. We were on Freedom Boulevard at the time, about 2nd North and Freedom Boulevard. And so Smith was only about a block and a half away. So I ran over to Smith's, and as I walked in, here's Christine. She sees me about probably 30 or 40 feet away. I walk in the door, and she's just screaming my name, just giddy and excited. And I remember turning my head away from her. And instantaneously, as soon as that happened, so freeze frame it. Here's an individual that I have been comfortable with talking in my own environment at the food and care, but now I've run into her out into the community setting, and she's clearly, it's not a normal response for somebody to start yelling out your name in the middle of a store, right? And so I was a little embarrassed initially, and so I turned away, and I thought, man, I just devalued her as a human being because I was worried about what other people would think if I was associated with her. And I was so glad that I learned that lesson early on. Yeah. And then we've had, I had a client that came in, no mental health issues, but he did have developmental disabilities. His IQ, he was probably 75 to 78 on the IQ spectrum, major seizures. So he was having daily seizures out on the street. Wow. His family had all moved away. His favorite brother had been killed. And we later found and was able to connect him with his sister. but I was his payee for 30 years. He just passed away January 1st of this year. So right after, within the morning hours of New Year's Day, he passed away. But he was having daily seizures on the street, and he had a limited IQ, and so, but at the same time, he wanted to work. He didn't want anything given to him. And I befriended him, and he became a member of our family.
Yeah.
I took him to Disneyland with my daughters a couple of years ago because he had never been.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, Terry, do you want to come with
awesome.
us? And so we went. But in his situation, he needed somebody. We were able to go. I was able to reach out to somebody that specialized in epileptic seizures. And we were able to get him in for some testing and found out that his brain was having constant seizures. But because of that, we were able to get him on a medication where I think in the last 15 years, I don't think he ever had a seizure. And he went from having daily seizures, and he would come into our facility and he literally looked like he just got out of a boxing match. Oh. His head would just be swollen and beat up and bloody and bruised. And I thought, man, somebody's taking advantage of this guy on the street, right? That was my first thought. And then, obviously became aware of his seizure issues. And so I became his payee. He got I was able to get him applied for Social Security disability. He was certainly somebody that should have qualified for Social Security disability. We were able to get that, and we were able to keep him housed for the rest of his life. So wow. For almost 30 years, he was housed. And we were able to connect him with family, and none of them lived here locally, but he had a sister who lived out in Ohio, and we were able to get him out there to see her before he passed. And so, and then another quick story, a sister tandem, one just recently passed away, but they grew up in Springville, and mom and dad were both addicts. One was blackout drunk, meaning they drank until they blacked out. And then the other was a meth addict. And here's these two young girls. I think there was 4 or 5 in their family. But anyways, they, as young teens, decided they wanted to escape the home because it was obviously a mess. They were in and out of work all the time, sometimes able to hold jobs, sometimes not, depending on the depth of the throes of their addiction. But they went and train hopped for several years, came back into the community as late teens, one being a blackout drunk and one being a meth addict when they returned. And I remember, man, we're just never going to see a change here because of the upbringing and because of, addiction. If you can overcome it, man, my hat's off to anybody that's overcome addiction, because those are some of the strongest people that are out there. Yeah. But the one sister that was that alcohol was her issue, she joined into our work training program that we had at the time, became beloved by our staff, got housed, and then she left our program and was able to remain housed until she passed away this past year. And then her sister, she had the meth problem, and so she had come in similar to the story I told earlier. It was the dentists that were able to tell her, hey, look, I would love to help you, but you got to get the addiction issue. But in her case, she actually came to us and said, I have 5 kids, and now I've got one of my children going down the path of addiction. I've got to be a transitional character in my own family. Yeah. I've got to be the one where the buck stops with me. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to expose future generations to this anymore. And so she came in, she committed to a path of sobriety, maintained that sobriety. She came in, had full mouth restoration. And here's a woman that had wanted to go back to school, had been trying to find work, but when she opened her mouth, she had practically no teeth. Mm-hmm. And so obviously she was probably having a hard time because of that. Within weeks of her getting her dental done, she was employed. Mm. And I think within a few weeks after that, she was going back to UVU for schooling. Wow. And has held that line. And so it's just presenting opportunity. Yeah. and really getting to know people. Every one of these people, we've just kind of told a very superficial portion of the story because time doesn't allow, but we had really deep connections to all these
Yeah.
people.
Absolutely.
And I really believe it was those connections that led to them taking advantage of those opportunities that were out there.
Yeah.
So
Amazing. And thank you for those stories and I think the light that it brings to how you can truly connect with these individuals and humanize them, right? And
Yeah.
just be their friend and give them opportunity, right, to change their life.
And it's on the same side of the community. Forgive me, I'll tell one more
Please.
story. You wanted to go have story content heavy here. But one of the most amazing, we've had, we're on a 4.5 acre campus. Again, in the early days, in the late 80s, we were begging and borrowing for people to come in and pay attention and become involved. And I don't want to say my comment earlier about having to turn away volunteers. I don't want that to disincentivize people from not wanting to get involved. Still get involved because there's other ways. But I had a mother that came in one day. It was right after we moved into this new building there in South Provo. And she came in, tears in her eyes, and she had her 7-8-year-old son with her. And they had a few bags of items that they were going to donate. Now, flashback about a week prior to that, she tells me the story that her son had seen a news story on one of the Salt Lake stations about homelessness. And he was touched and moved by it that he wanted to go out and do something. And so he said, "Hey, Mom, I want to go collect some things and take to the homeless." And she was, to her credit, she admitted it. She said, "I dismissed him not once, not twice, but 3 times. He came to me that week wanting to do something for the homeless. And I dismissed him every time. I was too busy, or we had things going, or we just didn't, whatever, right? The excuse that we can all use." And Saturday morning, the young man, without her knowing, he goes out into the garage, grabs his little red wagon. He goes around the neighborhood and he collects these things. And then fast forward to that Monday morning when she came in with her son, and she's in tears and she goes, "Man, my son really just taught me a real valuable lesson."
Yeah.
And, and in terms of the donation, it was the widow's mite,
Yeah.
right? It was a baggie. I remember it was a baggie with maybe $7 or $8 and change. There was probably a bag or two with, I think, a blanket and some clothes. And then there was a little baggie of maybe 6 or 7 pounds of food.
Yeah.
So in terms of the biggest impact, it wasn't the biggest impact. But in terms of the story behind it, it was the biggest impact.
Yeah.
Because what it tells us, and I think that's been your experience, it's been my experience, and I think anybody that's got involved with the homeless issue, there's a lot of the criticisms and judgments that once you start serving the population, you realize it's a lot more nuanced. It's not rocket science, but it's a lot more nuanced because people are complex.
Yep.
We're emotional, spiritual, beings. And when we have unmet need, you often see, what we see in the homeless community. And I've always felt like the Food and Care Coalition, it was our responsibility to put our best foot forward.
Yeah.
So when we opened that building, I remember the day when we went from these old roach-fested small building, and then we opened this 4.5 acre campus. And I remember the clients coming in and going, "Wow."
Yeah.
For us, and it changed the whole dynamic. Because they hear it on TV.
Yeah.
"Oh, we don't want a homeless center by us, or we don't want it by our business." And I get that, but we got to be somewhere. And I think where we're at, we have a minimal impact on the business community and on the residential community, because we're kind of in a commercial zoning.
Yeah.
But it's about the connection, and it's about people, and it's about coming together and finding the I guess the commonalities between us, and not leaving the issue at arm's length. When we leave issues at arm's length, then it just gives us an excuse not to be involved.
Yeah.
Or to make those passive judgments that may not be fair.
Absolutely. Well, Brent, as we kind of wrap up here, I just kind of want to turn it now to talking to the community, talking to listeners. maybe just to start it off, what can they do specifically with Food and Care Coalition? What kind of opportunities exist for them there to, again, continue to encourage people to volunteer and overflow your volunteer sheets, right? And on top of that as well, homeless individuals are everywhere, right? They're near your home, they're near your grocery stores, they're near, we see them all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's not an issue that necessarily is going away today, right? What would you say to individuals that are able to interact and help the homeless community out there, whether it's through Food and Care or just through their own means?
Yeah, I think right away it's just being compassionate, seeing them as a human being, seeing them as somebody that is a product of a creator, and that we're all brothers and sisters out there, regardless of our faith, regardless of any other distinctions that we may, try to divide us. I think just treating people with respect and kindness when you see them on the street. Don't just pass them by, even if you can't give them. We don't believe in encouraging panhandling, but engage with them.
Yeah.
Connect them to resources, and realize that even facilities like ours, we can't do everything. And so, as far as volunteering, if you go to foodandcare.org, or you reach out to our volunteer coordinator, her name's Jenny. volunteer@foodandcare.org is her email. If you can't volunteer, a lot of people are going to want to volunteer. I mean, I'm getting calls almost every day, emails almost every day. Can I come in Thanksgiving Day, right, and volunteer? It's already covered.
Yeah.
So that volunteer experience isn't going to be available. But there's other ways that people can get involved. We have needs. We go through, we distribute toothpaste and toothbrushes and feminine hygiene and dental floss and toothbrushes and soap and every imaginable hygiene item you can think of. We need those things donated so that we can then redistribute. We have a partnership with DI, so clothing vouchers. We're able to give our clients a clothing voucher. They can go down and shop instead of, I've always called our project a dignity project. When we serve people in the dining room, we do it by the volunteers taking the meal out to the to the client in the dining room, as opposed to having them walk through a soup kitchen line.
Yeah.
To me, that's just kind of dehumanizing. Same way with the clothing. Instead of rummaging through a back room of clothes that were just donated by the community, we shift all of ours over to DI, and then we give them a voucher and they can go in and shop, like the rest of us would.
Yep.
And so there's always needs. Obviously, there's always financial needs, so people can donate through the website. We are going to be in the giving machines this year in Utah County and Orem. So people can come out to the giving machines and donate there, or just go to our website or contact the staff. We've got a list of needs, everything from scrubs. When people check into our micro motel rooms that are upstairs, they go through a shower, delicing shampoo, treatment, and then they get a pair of scrubs while all their clothes go through a debug oven. We've got toilet paper and paper towels and laundry detergent and twin-sized bed sheets and pillows, and the list is pretty lengthy, but just go to our website. Again, www.foodandcare.org, and click on the in-kind or donation link, and you'll find all that information there.
I love it. Well, would love to call all listeners to go and get involved with Food and Care, with your local shelters, with those that just do something to make an impact, right? What you do truly can change someone's life. To highlight the giving machines, again, those will be unveiled tonight, Tuesday, November 24th at 7 p.m. at the University Place Mall in Orem, Utah. So if you're interested in going there and using the giving machines, that's a great way to go and give back as well. But thank you, Brent, so much for being on. Thank you for telling those stories and giving us some insight into the homeless community, and just get involved. Do something. It's the season of giving. And it's a great opportunity to kind of reflect on your neighbors, right, who are out there and struggling. So thanks again, Brent, for being here, and we will see everyone on the next episode. Thank you to 5 Star Legacy Foundation for sponsoring this podcast, and we'll see everybody next time.